The Grand Hyatt Ballroom was everything I'd learned to despise about corporate culture. All crystal chandeliers and hollow accomplishment, where the currency wasn't competence but performance. I stood in the periphery in my rented tuxedo, nursing a drink I didn't want, watching people I'd made wealthy debate their next vacation homes. My name is Wyatt Thorne. I'm 29 years old and I'd just been publicly dismantled by my boss. Victor Sterling, CEO of Aperture Tech, found me by the velvet ropes separating the elite from the merely successful. He had that particular smile, the one that telegraphed bad news wrapped in false camaraderie. "Wyatt, you're the backbone of this company," Victor said, his hand landing on my shoulder with the weight of a guillotine. "But you're just not C-suite material. We're promoting Dominic to VP of Product Innovation. He has the presence, the vision. Don't worry, you'll keep doing what you do best. Training. The technical work. The stuff that keeps the lights on." Behind him stood his wife, Laura, looking like someone who'd learned to smile through chronic pain. And between them, holding Laura's hand, was Isabel, Victor's 10-year-old daughter, who hadn't spoken a word to anyone in exactly 365 days. The public nature of the humiliation was calculated. Victor wanted witnesses. He wanted me to understand that I was essential but disposable, necessary but worthless. He was promoting his son, Dominic, a man I'd trained myself, a man who barely understood the systems he was being handed. "Congratulations," I managed. The word tasted like battery acid. Victor turned away, smirking. Dominic appeared beside him, shooting me a look of pure contempt. The look of someone who'd just been handed a kingdom he didn't deserve and fully understood it. Then, something shifted in the atmosphere. Isabel looked up at me, and for the first time in a year, her distant blue eyes locked onto mine with a clarity that felt like being struck by lightning. Her hand released her mother's and she stepped forward. When she spoke, it was barely a whisper, fragile, fractured, each word taking visible effort. "Dance with me. Please." The words hung in the air like a prayer no one had expected. "I am Wyatt Thorne and this is the story of how I lost everything and got back what mattered. 5 years ago I was a brilliant nobody, a software engineer with a vision that terrified me because it was so clear, so perfect, so real. I designed an algorithm that I called the black box. Not because it was mysterious but because it was the heart of everything. A core sequencing system that could predict market patterns, analyze investment opportunities, and generate profits with an accuracy that bordered on supernatural. I designed it before I joined Aperture Tech. I designed it in my apartment on my own time with my own equipment. It was mine, pure and simple. Then Victor Sterling recruited me. He was charismatic, intelligent, and he understood exactly what he was looking at when I showed him the algorithm. "This is extraordinary," he'd said, holding the code like it was a religious text. "This is a company. This is everything." He offered me a salary I couldn't refuse and a position I was naive enough to accept. He also offered me a contract. A restrictive NDA so comprehensive that it essentially transferred all intellectual property I created to the company, retroactively claiming ownership of the black box. I signed it. I was 24 and believed that loyalty was rewarded. Aperture Tech became worth $500 million almost immediately. The black box generated 80% of the company's revenue. It was used by hedge funds, institutional investors, and corporations desperate for an edge. Victor became a venture capitalist's darling. And he gave me a promotion to senior software engineer, a title that meant everything and nothing. I wasn't invited to shareholder meetings. I didn't attend board lunches. I worked in the basement server room, maintaining the algorithm that had made everyone around Victor rich. The company's valuation climbed. Victor's net worth climbed. My salary, while comfortable, felt like hush money. But none of that mattered the day I met Isabel. It happened 6 months before the gala. I'd been working late, debugging some routine security updates when I found her in the company library, a quiet space on the executive floor that almost no one used. She was sitting alone, drawing geometric patterns on a tablet with meticulous, obsessive precision. Her father had brought her to the office. It was a Saturday. Most of the building was empty. I recognized her from photos in Victor's office. Isabel. The daughter he rarely mentioned. The daughter everyone knew hadn't spoken since her parents' marriage had begun crumbling a year ago. She looked up at me with the wariness of an animal that had learned people were unpredictable. "Hi," I said carefully. "I'm Wyatt. Can I sit?" She didn't answer, but she didn't turn away. I sat beside her, maintaining distance, and looked at her tablet. The patterns she'd drawn were extraordinary, not random but mathematical, recursive, fractal-like. They reminded me of visualizations of complex code sequences. "These are beautiful," I said. She glanced at me, then back to her drawing. Over the next few weeks, I found excuses to work late. And on those late nights, Isabel would appear in the library. We developed a language without words. I'd sit beside her, we'd work in companionable silence, and gradually, I realized what I was looking at. Isabel wasn't just intelligent. She was extraordinary. She had what I'd come to recognize as pattern recognition at the level of genius, the same kind of mind that could understand complex systems by intuition alone. She was a natural coder, even though she'd never written a line of code. One night, I did something risky. I created a simple encrypted communication game on her tablet, a visual language using colors and sequences, where each combination represented a concept or question. It was based on her patterns, on the way her mind seemed to organize information. Red meant yes or agreement. Green meant no or caution. Blue meant question. Yellow meant help. Purple meant I'm here or safe. At first, she just played with it. Then something shifted. She began using the sequences intentionally, building complex combinations that answered my questions. Purple red red meant I'm here and you're safe and I want to stay. Green blue red meant something is wrong but I trust you. We were speaking in a language that belonged only to us. I never pushed her to speak. Autistic children often have their own communication preferences, and her silence was a choice, a defense mechanism, a language in itself. But in those sequences, I began to understand her. Her loneliness, her intelligence, her fear of her father, and something else. Something that felt urgent. 3 months into our library sessions, I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me all along. She was afraid of her father. Not afraid in a way that required intervention. Victor wasn't physically abusive. But he was controlling, dismissive, and his narcissism had become weaponized in his marriage. Isabel felt the instability. She saw the tension. And her silence was a response to a home that was crumbling around her. I became her sanctuary. And then came the gala. When Isabel whispered those 4 words, "Dance with me, please," I understood 2 things simultaneously. First, she had chosen to break her year-long silence. For me. Which meant something was genuinely wrong. And second, she wanted to communicate in a way that wouldn't raise suspicion. On a dance floor in plain sight, hidden in noise and movement and normalcy. I took her hand. It was trembling. "Okay," I said. "Let's dance." We moved onto the dance floor, a strange, suspended island in the middle of the whirling crowd. The orchestra was playing something classical and loud, and Victor was laughing with someone from HR, completely unaware that his daughter had just broken her silence. As we swayed to the music, Isabel leaned into my chest, her voice so soft I almost couldn't hear it. "Bad code," she whispered. "In system. Tessa, help hide. Red green lock. Find it. Before Friday." My blood went cold. "Tessa?" I asked quietly, my hand steady on her back, our body language casual to any observer. "Tessa and Daddy," Isabel whispered. "Together. Bad together. Tessa moved money. Red green lock in your old files." Red green lock. That was a reference to a security protocol Isabel had seen me work on months ago, something we'd turned into a game. She was telling me that there was something hidden in my old code files, something marked with that sequence, something I'd forgotten about. "How do you know this?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I see Daddy's computer," she whispered. "I see things he doesn't know I see. I'm scared. Mommy is sad. Tessa is bad. Help us, please. Before Friday." The music swelled. We looked like any father and daughter, or trusted adult and child, simply enjoying the song. But we were exchanging information that would change everything. "I'll help," I promised. "I promise, Isabel. I'll find it." We finished the dance. I walked her back to her mother. Laura's eyes met mine for just a moment and I saw something in them, a flicker of recognition or maybe just exhaustion. She didn't know that her daughter had spoken. Not yet. But she would. By Monday morning, Isabel's words were burning in my brain like a fever. "Bad code. Tessa. Move money." I sat at my desk in the basement server room, my access credentials still valid. One of the few benefits of my new training role was that I technically needed broad system access to help Dominic, even though he resented every second I spent teaching him. I started with my old project files, the ones I'd archived 5 years ago when Victor had first brought me on. I was looking for anything flagged with the red-green lock protocol, a security marker I'd used during testing phases. What I found was worse than I'd anticipated. Hidden in the metadata of the black box's original source code were a series of transactions, not in the code itself, but embedded in the version control logs. Someone had been using my archived files as a temporary storage location for financial records. Small transfers at first, then larger ones. All routed through a shell corporation called Orion Holdings. My hands started shaking. I pulled up the accounting database. I still had access to the financial infrastructure, a relic of my earlier role. The transfer started 18 months ago and had accelerated dramatically over the past 6 months. The amounts were staggering. Millions of dollars siphoned out through fake vendor payments, all funneling into Orion Holdings. I ran Orion's routing number through my memory. I recognized it immediately. 5 years ago, when I was testing security protocols, I created a dummy shell company generator for internal tracking tests. That routing number was the one I'd used to mark test accounts. Never meant to be real, never meant to be used outside a sandbox environment. Someone had taken that dummy routing number and made it real. Someone had built a fraudulent system using my old test infrastructure. The implications started connecting in my mind like dominoes. The shell corporation. The systematic embezzlement. The fact that it was hidden in my archived files, where someone knew I wouldn't think to look because I'd assumed that project was closed. Someone on the inside knew my systems intimately enough to weaponize my own testing protocols against the company. I needed to know who. But more importantly, I needed to know why. Over the next 3 days, I began building a secondary firewall around my personal data. I was certain that the moment the fraud was discovered, Victor would try to delete anything that connected him to it. I worked late into the nights, quietly mirroring files to an encrypted cloud server that only I could access. I wasn't breaking any laws. I was protecting my own work from being destroyed. Or at least that's what I told myself. On Thursday, I took a risk that changed everything. Using our encrypted coding game, I sent Isabel a message through her school tablet. Green red lock. Oh. I waited. For hours, nothing came back. Then, at 11 p.m., while I was staring at the transaction logs in my apartment, her response appeared, VT Victor and Tessa. Victor and Tessa. The CEO and the HR director. I needed to understand the full scope before I could act. Over the next 72 hours, I became someone I'd never been before. A digital detective, moving through the company's financial infrastructure like a ghost, following trails of money and encrypted communications. What I found was a conspiracy that made my stomach churn. Tessa Klein, the HR director, had been having an affair with Victor Sterling for approximately 2 years. The relationship had been conducted entirely through encrypted emails and secret hotel meetings. But it had cost money, luxury hotels, expensive dinners, weekend getaways that had to be explained somehow. Victor had solved that problem by using company funds. But here's where it got darker. Dominic, Victor's son from a previous, never-acknowledged relationship, had gambling debts. Serious debts. The kind of debts that destroyed families. I found evidence that someone, almost certainly Victor, had been using company money to pay them off, routing the payments through Tessa's shell corporation to hide the trail. Tessa was being paid directly, not as payoffs for her affair, but as compensation for her complicity in the fraud. She was the second person who needed to benefit from the embezzlement scheme to keep it secret. The brilliance of the system was its simplicity. By routing everything through my old testing infrastructure, Victor had created a situation where the financial irregularities would be attributed to legacy code if they were ever discovered. I was the perfect scapegoat. By demoting me and promoting Dominic, Victor was setting up a future scenario where, if questioned, he could claim that Dominic had inherited a flawed system and that I'd left it compromised before I was removed for incompetence. It was diabolical. And it hinged entirely on Isabel's silence. As long as she didn't speak, as long as she didn't reveal what she'd seen on her father's computer, the fraud could continue unchecked. Victor had broken his daughter's voice to protect his secrets. That was when I decided what had to happen. I needed to go back to the beginning, to understand something that had been nagging at me since I first reviewed the transaction logs. In the original black box source code, the algorithm I'd designed 5 years ago, there was something I'd almost forgotten about. A security protocol I'd built as a failsafe, back when I was paranoid about Victor stealing my work. I was 24 and brilliant and angry, and I'd embedded something in the code that I'd never told anyone about. It was a time lock vulnerability. Not a bug, but a feature. A dormant sequence that I could activate remotely if the company were ever compromised by someone I didn't trust. It was designed to do 3 things. Freeze all financial transactions above a certain threshold, dump the complete server logs to an external secure location, and lock the entire system down until authorization was verified. The activation phrase was simple: red-green lock. It was a phrase I'd used in a dozen security tests. A phrase I'd embedded in conversation, in my notes, in the architecture documentation that only I fully understood. And it was the exact phrase that Isabel had whispered to me at the gala. Suddenly, I understood. Isabel hadn't been warning me about Tessa or the money. She'd been telling me to activate the failsafe. Somehow, in her extraordinary pattern recognition, she'd pieced together fragments of conversation she'd overheard, things she'd seen, and she'd landed on the solution I'd designed years ago. She didn't know what a failsafe was. She just knew it was important, and she knew I would understand. I spent 3 days verifying that the failsafe was still functional. It was. Dormant, yes, but ready. The code had been so deeply embedded in the algorithm's architecture that even when Victor claimed ownership of the black box, he hadn't understood its foundation. Victor had stolen my algorithm, but he hadn't stolen my insurance policy. Now I needed to decide if I was willing to use it. I needed an ally, and there was only one person in the company who had both the access and the moral clarity to help me. Laura Sterling, Victor's wife, was a co-founder of Aperture Tech. She'd stepped back from daily operations 5 years ago, officially to manage the company's charitable foundation, but everyone knew the real reason. Victor couldn't stand sharing credit. I compiled everything I'd found: the transaction logs, the Shell Corporation routing numbers, the communications between Victor and Tessa, the evidence of Dominic's debt payments. I organized it into an encrypted file and sent it to her personal email with a single message. Laura, I found something you need to see. Not as an employee but as a shareholder. Check the Orion Holdings account. A friend. I didn't identify myself. For 3 days I heard nothing. I began to wonder if she'd even read the message. Then, on Thursday evening, I received a call on my personal phone from a number I didn't recognize. Wyatt, Laura said quietly. It's Laura Sterling. We need to talk. We met at a coffee shop far from the office. She was smaller in person than I'd expected, worn down by years of marriage to a narcissist. But her eyes were sharp. I hired an external auditor, she said without preamble. Quietly. They've been going through the books for a week. Wyatt, what you found is real. The Shell Corporation, the embezzlement, all of it. But there's more. Tessa's been manipulating HR records, covering up complaints about Dominic's behavior toward employees. This is a conspiracy that goes deeper than just the affair and the money. Did you tell Victor? I asked carefully. No, not yet. Victor thinks the audit is routine due diligence. He has no idea I'm investigating him personally. But Wyatt, I need to ask you something. Did Isabel send you to find this? I went very still. She spoke to me at the gala, I said carefully. For the first time in a year. Laura's eyes filled with tears. She did? She stopped, collecting herself. She came home that night and hasn't said another word. But she left her iPad on my desk. There was a message on it. In her coding game. She typed, Mommy, Wyatt will help. Trust him. Daddy is bad. The words hit me like a physical blow. She's protecting you, Laura said softly. She's protecting both of us. I won't let her down. But Wyatt, if we're going to do this, we have to be smart. Victor will destroy us both if he realizes what we're planning. There's going to be a shareholder meeting, I said. Friday. A full SEC compliance meeting with external regulators. I'm guessing the external audit was scheduled to present findings. Laura nodded. At 2 p.m. Then that's when we move, I said. I spent Friday morning at my apartment, doing something that terrified me. I was about to use technology to commit what could be interpreted as sabotage. Even though Victor was guilty of fraud, even though I had legitimate reasons, activating that failsafe was going to be a crime in the eyes of the law. Unauthorized system access. Interference with company infrastructure. Data exfiltration. But I'd made a promise to a little girl who'd broken her year-long silence to protect her mother. I'd made a promise to myself that justice, real justice, mattered more than comfort. At 1:45 p.m. Friday, I sat in a quiet coffee shop 3 miles from the Aperture Tech office building. My laptop was set to VPN, bounced through 3 different proxies. The code was ready. The failsafe was armed. I'd spent the morning reviewing the security implications of what I was about to do. I'd also spent the morning making one critical modification to my original plan. When the failsafe activated, it wasn't going to lock out the servers or freeze transactions. Those measures would trigger immediate investigation into the code itself, and I'd be discovered within hours. Instead, I'd modified the failsafe to something more elegant. The backdoor would activate silently. It would dump the server logs to a secure cloud location, but only the logs that related to the embezzlement, and only in a format that the external auditors and SEC could access directly without me having to provide it. Then it would create a cascade of algorithmic failures in the black box's output, making it immediately obvious to Victor that something was wrong with the core system. In his panic to fix it, he'd call me. He'd demand I save the algorithm. And in helping him, I'd have a legitimate reason to be examining the code, to be accessing the systems, to be in position to discover the fraud myself. I would be the savior, not the saboteur. At 1:58 p.m., I initiated the sequence. I typed, red-green lock. The code executed in milliseconds. Inside the Aperture Tech boardroom, Victor was sitting at the head of the table, beaming with the kind of satisfaction that only comes from successfully burying crimes. Next to him was Dominic, wearing the smug expression of someone who'd been given power without earning it. Tessa sat near the back, trying to look professional while secretly messaging Victor under the table. Laura sat to my left. I'd walked in as her consulting advisor, my presence explained by her desire for technical clarity during the audit discussion. The external auditor was just beginning to present findings when the first alert sounded. Victor's phone buzzed. Then his computer. Then every monitor in the building simultaneously displayed a red warning: core algorithm failure. The black box had stopped working. What the? Victor lunged for his phone, already calling the server room. But the server room was empty because I'd sent the night tech home early with a lie about system maintenance. Victor, we need to postpone, the SEC investigator said carefully. No, just a minute. This is a glitch. Our system is the most robust in the industry. He was already frantically typing, trying to access the algorithm diagnostics. Nothing was responding correctly. Wyatt, he screamed into his phone. Wyatt, where the hell are you? The system is down. I let him wait for 2 minutes. Then I called back. I'm 10 minutes out, I said calmly. I was on my way in when I got alerts. I'll be there soon. When I walked into the boardroom 9 minutes later, I was carrying a tablet and wearing the expression of someone who just discovered something catastrophic. There's bad news, I said, looking directly at the SEC investigator. Really bad news. It's not the algorithm that's failed. It's the financial data. Someone's been using the old test infrastructure as a staging ground for embezzlement. The system detected unauthorized access patterns and locked down for security. All the transaction logs are being automatically preserved for investigation. The room went silent. That's impossible, Victor said, his face going pale. No, I said. It's exactly what I designed it to do. 5 years ago, when I built the fail-safe protocols into the black box, I anticipated this kind of fraud. If anyone tried to use my original testing framework for illegal purposes, the system would flag it and preserve the evidence. I just forgot about it until the system activated on its own. It was a beautiful lie, told with perfect technical conviction. The SEC investigator leaned forward. What kind of evidence are we talking about? Complete transaction logs, I said. Every wire transfer, every routing number, every shell corporation connection. All automatically preserved in a secure server location that only law enforcement and SEC oversight can access now. The system locked me out too. Which was technically true. I had locked myself out. Deliberately. Victor's face was doing something remarkable, cycling through denial, panic, and finally, a kind of hollow acceptance. He looked at Tessa, who had gone completely white. You bastard, Dominic spat at me. You sabotaged the system. I protected it, I said calmly. From people like you. The SEC investigator was already on her phone, coordinating with federal agents who'd apparently been on standby for this exact possibility. Laura had been cooperating with them for days. Victor lunged at me. Actually lunged, his hands reaching for my collar before security stopped him. You'll never work in this industry again, Victor snarled. I'll destroy you. Maybe, I said. But your daughter will sleep better knowing her silence finally saved someone. The consequences came quickly and decisively. Victor Sterling was arrested at the scene on federal charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The external audit revealed that he'd been systematically stealing from Aperture Tech for years, nearly $4 million total, routed through shell corporations and used to fund his affair, Dominic's debts, and a luxury lifestyle he could never have explained to shareholders. Dominic was fired immediately and flagged for his own legal exposure regarding the debt payments and his awareness of company fraud. Tessa was arrested as an accomplice. The investigation revealed that she'd been paid over $600,000 for her participation in the conspiracy. Aperture Tech, rather than collapsing, actually stabilized. The board of directors brought in an interim CEO. Laura, as a co-founder and primary shareholder, assumed a more active role in leadership and immediately began restructuring the company ethically. The black box remained intact. The algorithm continued to generate revenue for the company, but now the credit was redistributed. My original authorship was documented. My intellectual property was legally recognized. I was reinstated as lead algorithm developer with full recognition and appropriate compensation. I was also brought in to investigate my own failsafe, to understand how it had activated. I explained it as a forgotten security protocol that had been triggered by unusual access patterns. The investigation concluded that it was a fortunate coincidence that had prevented a much larger catastrophe. No one pressed me on the details. Everyone benefited from the narrative that painted me as a brilliant but forgetful engineer who'd accidentally built an insurance against his own paranoia. But the most important consequence came on a Monday morning, 3 weeks after Victor's arrest. Laura brought Isabel to my apartment. The girl was uncertain, holding her mother's hand like it was a lifeline, but her eyes were searching for me the moment she saw me. "Hi, Isabel," I said carefully. For a moment nothing happened. Then slowly she released her mother's hand and walked toward me. She took my hand and led me to the window. We stood in silence, looking out at Portland stretching below us, the mountains visible in the distance. "Thank you," Isabel said quietly. Her voice was still fragile, still tentative, but it was there. It was real. "For listening when I couldn't speak. Thank you for speaking when I needed you to," I said. "Daddy isn't coming home," she said matter-of-factly. "No, he's not. Mommy is sad but also happy. I don't understand." "That's okay," I said. "Sometimes people feel two things at the same time. Sad because someone they loved did bad things. Happy because the bad things stopped." Isabel considered this. Then she asked, "Will you teach me real code? The kind that means things?" "Yes," I said. "I'll teach you everything." Over the following months, Isabel began coming to my apartment twice a week. We started with simple programming concepts, then advanced to more complex systems. But we never stopped using our original language, the color sequences and geometric patterns that belonged only to us. Her voice, once so fragile, grew stronger. She began speaking more at school, more at home. She was still autistic, still preferred written and visual communication to verbal, still had her struggles. But she was speaking because she'd chosen to reclaim her voice, not because anyone forced her. Laura began dating again. A kind man who worked in venture capital and understood that Isabel came as a package deal, that their family was different now, harder one, more precious because it had been salvaged from the wreckage of deception. My career transformed. Merit Global Investments, the firm that managed Aperture Tech's portfolio, took an interest in me. They offered me a position as Chief Technology Officer, overseeing algorithm development for their entire operation. The position came with equity, autonomy, and recognition for my actual work. I accepted. I stood in a conference room at Aperture Tech, presenting the findings of an independent investigation into corporate fraud prevention. The case study was, obviously, our own company. How a company had nearly been destroyed from within. How systemic corruption had been prevented by vigilance and safeguards, and the unlikely alliance between an engineer and a child. I didn't use names. I didn't reveal the real mechanisms of how the fraud was discovered. The official narrative, that I designed a brilliant failsafe that had accidentally activated, remained intact. In the back of the room, Isabel sat with Laura and a woman from the SEC. At 13, Isabel was tall, her face showing hints of the woman she would become. She was an intern at the company now, working in the data security division. Her official job was data analysis. Her real job was being my assistant in building the next generation of security protocols. She was also the youngest certified ethical hacker in the company's history. As I presented the case study, I watched her take notes in her coded language, the language that had saved us all. Red for important. Green for caution. Purple for hope. The presentation ended to applause. As people filed out, Isabel approached me. "Good presentation," she said. Her voice was clear now, confident. She still preferred silence, but she'd reclaimed the choice of when to use her voice and when to let her code speak for her. "Thank you," I said. "Do you want to get lunch?" "Yes," she said. "But I need to ask my mom first." I watched her walk to her mother, watch them confer quietly, watch Isabel's face light up when Laura nodded. What people never understand about revenge is that the best kind isn't about destruction. It's not about taking down the person who wronged you. It's about building something so genuinely good, so fundamentally strong, that the corruption can't touch it anymore. Victor Sterling was in federal prison, scheduled for release in 7 years, assuming he didn't face additional charges. But more importantly, a woman had reclaimed her company. A child had reclaimed her voice. An engineer had reclaimed credit for his work. We'd all been stolen from. And we'd all been saved, not by me alone but by each other. As I watched Isabel and Laura walk out of the office building, the evening light catching in Isabel's hair, I understood something fundamental about justice. It's not really about punishment. It's about love. It's about protecting the people who matter. It's about being someone worth speaking for. And sometimes, the most powerful code is the voice of a child who chose to break her silence to save the people she loved. If you've made it this far, you understand, respect is non-negotiable. My worth wasn't defined by Victor calling me not C-suite material, or giving Dominic credit for my work. My story proves that silence can be a weapon, and compassion, the language of code I shared with Isabel, can be the ultimate power. If this resonated with you, if a narcissistic boss has publicly humiliated you, tell them this. Your silence doesn't make you weak. Your boundaries don't make you difficult. Your survival makes you extraordinary. My genius was only ever waiting for the red-green lock to be remembered. The revolution happens when you decide to write your own ending. They thought I was just a coder. I became the key to freezing their entire corrupt network. Share your story below and don't forget to like and subscribe.